Hello, my name is Marianne Stolz. I am a woodcarver. I have been carving since a long time, and finally get to do a show here at the Bear Gallery. And today I would like to talk about wood as a medium. There's way less woodworkers than there are painters and photographers, so it's a rarity and it should be used a little more often. So why would you use wood over other stuff like metal, concrete, plastics, paper, whatever? My own reason, I just like the independency of wood. I can go in the forest, cut down a tree, take it home, work on it, have a finished piece. I don't need anything, anyone. I can do it all by myself. To me, that's pretty cool. I also like the feel of wood. That's just my personal touch. I like the process of shaping. If you work with ceramics, you build up. In wood, you take away. So in wood, you could say that the finished piece is already in there, and all you do is just take away the extra. That's pretty exciting if I look at a piece of wood. So I really like that process. I like the physical power you need. You know, painting, not for me. I need to whack and work, so wood is perfect for me. I like the tradition of wood. Wood has been, since ancient time, a material used for all kinds of tools, and if people had the time, they decorated those tools, and that's where this all comes from. So I like the ancientness of the art. And I like wood just because it's something natural, it's something growing, it's individual, it's not consistent, which is actually a big part where I draw my inspiration from. So you have a design in mind, you have wood you want to use, and you have the tools. And those are the three things I'm going to talk to you about today, about the wood, the design consideration, and tools. So let's start with the wood. John Manthei, he's a well-known person here in town. He made this beautiful book. It's just a cut piece and sliced into boards, and you can see inside the wood. Okay, so you see the different pictures the wood does at different places inside the piece of wood. Look at that grain versus this stuff. It just totally changes. Okay. So different parts of the trees have different grain patterns. I mean, you saw that in the book. You can see it really nicely here. So, you know, you would take a root flare, would be perfect for a sled runner. You have a burl. Where's my burl? Don't. Oh, here. You have a burl. You know, that would be beautiful for a bowl. And if you have a branch like this, you can use it perfectly for a hook. You know, so lots of different parts of the tree have their place and their uniqueness. What all wood has in common is its relationship to water, and that is very important to understand if you work with wood. So as long as the tree is living, it is full of water. It actually has some extra water. It has water in the cells and next to the cells, but once the tree is cut, there's no resupply of water and it starts to dry. So let's start at the beginning. This is my model of how how a tree looks on the inside. So it's nothing else but a lot of long straws that goes from the root all the way to the tip. And the tree soaks up the water, and through capillary action, it distributes it, just like your blood is distributed with capillary action to your fingertips. Tree does the same system. So once the tree is cut, it starts to dry. So it gives off the free water, the stuff that is in between the cells. And the wood that you cut just gets lighter. But once that water has evaporated, actually the waters in the cell starts to evaporate, and the wood starts to shrink. And this is, how it looks. It shrinks. This piece just cracked in one place. This piece shrunk in very many places. And that's part of the thing you need to know about wood. How does wood shrink? Because it shrinks, it's a three-dimensional piece, right? And it shrinks differently in every dimension. So in the length, it barely shrinks at all. It shrinks 0.01%. And all these numbers are average because, again, every tree is different. So it barely shrinks in length. It shrinks a little bit in thickness, but where it shrinks most is along the annual rings. You can really see the annual rings here. So this is where it shrinks the most. So you can actually see that in our cut piece. So those were, when they originally were cut, they were all straight cuts. And you can see that there are different gaps. So you see that each board in the tree shrinks differently. This is quite important to know. And on this piece, it's not very visible, but you can see that the bark is kind of loose. So you see that if in this dimension it doesn't shrink as much, so the most it does right here. So okay, wood and water. We have a fairly thick piece of wood, and you see how it cracks. It just cracks. This piece is a little thinner and no cracks. What happens, it gets thin enough that it actually starts to warp, that you can really well see in these really thin things. So those are totally warped. Now when I put these into the water, they will absorb the water, and you will be able to see what water does to wood very quick. So in big carvings, 2-inch piece of wood, it will take a lot longer, but here it's rather instantaneous. Now let's use that one. 3? Do I get 3 in there? Oh, let's just do that. So now what happens is the underside soaks up. So the underside swells, but the top doesn't. So that's why it compensates by curling. Yeah, now you see how it's totally relaxing. So if I drink 3 gallons of water, do I relax too? What's also interesting, you can watch the little crack it had in the middle. It actually will close. You can see on this piece, it had an inclusion here, and that's actually where it's soaking up first. So again, the wood is not homogeneous. It's, different in each place. Yeah, I mean, this is the crack is closed. It's almost completely wet. Not quite completely flat, but close. So another part of the wood is its structural strength. So in some direction, this is how the tree grows. In this direction, along the grain, wood is really strong. This is a much thinner piece. I can bend it quite a bit before it breaks. I would get it to break, but it's quite strong. Whereas across the grain, so the grain, this is how the tree grew, across the grain, It doesn't take anything at all. Here's a thicker piece. So those are comparable. This is with the grain. There's no way I can even bend it. So you see that is quite important. So if you need to adjust your design to the grain direction. Wooden shrinkage. This box I built in Germany that is quite a little bit more moist than our dry Alaska. So when I moved over here, I took this box along. It got a crack because the wood shrunk, and the way it was made, the wood had to crack. There was no other way, and I had to fix it by screwing it down. I'm not sure if you can see the 4 screws I had to use. It's functional again, but it has a crack. But there are other ways you can deal with wood shrinkage so it actually doesn't crack. This is my workbench. Again, I built it in Germany. I brought it over here where it's a lot drier. And the major part of the bench got more narrow. So you see actually how much it shrank compared to the long piece. So it's a 1/2 inch. But it didn't crack. It could move. You want to do the next picture? Because the way the bench was built. It actually can expand and shrink without cracking, still being totally functional without me having to do anything. It doesn't look pretty, but it's still totally functional. Okay, so design consideration. So if you work with wood, what does that do to your design? So one thing, wood has grain, color, we talked about that earlier. And so you chose your piece of wood that you want for your piece. So how is your piece going to be inside this piece of wood? And that is quite important because, as you can see here, this is a bowl carved on one side, and you see it's more stripes. And this is a bowl carved on the other side, and you can see it's circles. So it does matter where in your piece of wood your final piece will be. And I'm not sure if you can see that. This is the annual rings of the piece of wood. So yeah, you can learn how to predict, how your grain pattern will be on your finished piece. It takes a while, but it is predictable, sort of. But then it's not just one tree. There are a million different kinds of species, different kinds of wood that grow in different places, like the tropics or here in the north. And that gives us many, many, many different trees to choose from. And each tree has its own properties. Trees are divided into deciduous trees and coniferous trees. Coniferous trees are the ones that keep their needles, the evergreens, and they are considered the softwoods, and the deciduous trees, the ones that keep their drop their leaves, they are considered hardwoods. So it's actually not about how soft or hard the wood is, it's just whether it's a deciduous or a coniferous tree. So there are softwoods that are hard and hardwoods that are soft. Then we have for each kind of tree, we have their own properties. Like walnut is nice and dark, spruce is light, so color is definitely one of the properties wood has. Another thing to think about is the ease of machining and tooling. I have a tiny little piece of our ficus tree from the library. It's very beautiful, it has a nice grain, but it has a really sticky gum inside, so it just totally gums up your tools. So if you can live with it, great. If not, you should look for a different kind of wood. Weight is a thing. There are woods like ironwood actually sinks, so it would not be great for a boat, obviously. But oak would not be just good because it floats. Oak would also be good because there are several trees, including oak, that have chemicals in them that make them more rot resistant. So if you would have a carving for outside, that would be a great wood to choose. It's oak, redwood, red cedar are good woods for that. Red cedar is, a lot of times you have red cedar in saunas, not just because it's wood resistant, but also because it smells really nice. It has a really nice fragrant smell that's great for a sauna, but not for a cutting board. You know, for a cutting board, you would have a neutral, smelly, tasty wood, like maple. Maple is a great wood for a cutting board because it's neutral in flavor and it is very, I call it sticky. Sticky is not a real term, but the wood fibers are actually glued together very strongly, so it's a very tough wood, which makes it not such a great wood for carving because your tools get stuck in it. So I could go on forever like that. So you see, each wood has its own perfect place. If you have a project, you can pick and choose and take exactly what you need. So let me show you some basswood. If you have ever thought about carving, you probably have heard about basswood. Basswood is a wood that's usually recommended definitely as a beginner's wood, but it has a lot more applications than just beginner. And the reason is because it's in the middle of everything. It has a little bit of color, but too much. It's soft, but not too hard. The wood, you can get quite some details because, you know, the fibers are tough enough, but not too tough to get your tool stuck and so on. So basswood is a great wood for a lot of projects, but not the perfect one for everything. My personal choice for woods are not so much which kind, but where they're from. I really like to use local stuff, so I use local wood. And here we have a nice selection of local wood: black spruce, birch, alder, willow. There's a little bit of tamarack around here. That's aspen and white spruce. So you see there's lots of different kinds, and they have different, you know, densities, different characters. So most of the carving in my show you see are made with aspen, and that's the rough stock that I start on. All right, so the next section we'll talk about tools. So you need tools to hold your piece in place, and you need tools to shape the wood. So let's start with holding your tools in place. I have a nice clamp. I have a workbench. And for smaller pieces, I have a bench hook that's very practical. It's very movable. Those are my main pieces to hold stuff in place. Okay. So the tools you use for shaping, they can be power tools or hand tools. I have several power tools that I use. I have a router, angle grinder, die grinder. I have special power carving attachments. Chop saw, scroll saw are tools that I use quite a bit. But all of those, you wouldn't need them. You could just use hand tools for that as well, which would be an adze, a saw, axe. Those are great tools for rough shaping. Once you remove the most bulk of wood, you would start getting into your carving tools. I own about a set of 40, where those 3 is what I use 99% of the time. Everything else is more specialized tools that I rarely use. I have a few palm tools. They're just meant for your palm, whereas these are meant to be whacked. And then I have just a very small selection of knives. You don't need much, especially if you just stick with one kind of carving. You do not need more than 10 tools, which is awesome. So what's the advantage and disadvantages between power and hand tools? Power tools are more expensive most of the time. They're loud. They create a lot of dust. And if you do screw up, you screw up big. Hand tools, you spend a lot of sweat, so it's more on your body. But you're closer to the wood, you're slower, which I really like. Yeah, slow. I think that's probably the main thing. Power tools are most of the time just too fast for me. I need to ease my way into exactly where I want to have the final surface, and I cannot do that other than with hand tools. So all tools need to stay sharp, but your hand tools you can sharpen yourself. Sharpening is a whole nother talk in itself, so I just do a very, very quick summary. For most of my sharpening needs, I have a bench grinder. And then for my tiny little tools, I have a diamond stone in different sizes. And I have a slipstone for the inside. That's how I put an edge on every tool and keep it sharp. And then the most important tool is I touch every 5 minutes while I'm working. This is a leather strap, and it's charged with a diamond compound that's specifically made for that. And while I'm carving, every 5 or 10 minutes, I'm just run my tool across. You know, I can do the inside as well. I run my tool across the strap, and I'm ready to work again for another 10 minutes. If you do that, your tool will stay sharp for several hours of carving. So you barely will need to use the bench grinder, except if you drop your tool or hit your tool with another tool. Yeah, but sharpening is pretty important. You need to know how to do that. And it takes a long time to be very efficient and effective with it. So don't get frustrated. You will learn it. Okay, good. In this piece, the kindling, those are real pieces of kindling that I took out from my kindling pile. And you can really nicely see this is just axe split wood. And you see how it follows the grain. So this is a very nice example of grain is not straight. It curves around branches, and it curves around just from the tree growing. Yeah, and it goes in all 3 directions. Another thing I wanted to point out on this piece is the black. The black in all my pieces is not color. I didn't use paint. What I used is the blowtorch. This is actually burned wood, which I just love. I think it's great. It has an incredible color, and you can only do that with wood. Okay. In this piece, the commute, I chose spruce wood instead of aspen because I wanted to have the wood grain be part of the dynamics in the picture. And as I showed you earlier with those 2 little bowls on either side of the wood, I use that here quite a bit. Here is a ring formation. Here is a straight formation. Yeah, you can see I played a lot around with the wood as a design, the grain as a design element. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so I would like to show you some of my wood-specific design considerations on my pieces. So here we have my piece, the beginning. And when I first designed it, it was mirror image. Then I picked a piece of wood, and I really like that streak, the color streak here in the wood. And originally that would have been over there, but you know, I just mirrored image, and that way I could show off that nice part of the wood. Okay, on my stink bucket carving, there is not much really wood specific. You could do this piece of art in many different medias without changing much of the visual impact. But masks are traditionally carved in wood, so I do definitely like this connection, that the mask is carved in wood. In this piece, Adapting, you can see the different textures for finishing. On those snaky thingies, I actually use sandpaper, which I rarely use except for creating texture. And this is smooth textures versus tooled textures. This is just the carving tool, so it gives a really nice contrast in texturing. Okay, on this piece, what's important is the grain direction. So I wasn't sure which way I should put my piece in the wood. Should I have the grain this way or this way? Because I have places everywhere where, you know, it's important. So I ended up with having it this way. And of course, it broke. But there's wood glue, and you can glue stuff back together. But this is pretty much the limit of what you can do, especially with a soft wood like aspen. It might not have broken on a birch, but it did break, but you can glue it together. So this is a very small piece that I can't really clamp very well, so this is where the little bench hook comes in really handy. I can just put this piece in there. I have lots of holes in it that I can put pegs in. I can manipulate that really easy and well and turn it around on an instant. It's a very handy tool for small size carvings. Okay, so for my storyteller, I was going to talk a little bit about how you fasten the wood. So I start out with the rough piece. You can see that nicely. So I clamp it down. I cut it out with my scroll saw, and I leave a little piece here and here so I can actually clamp it down while I whack on it. Once I've removed most of the wood, I will cut off those two little ears, and I screwed it on just a piece of scrap wood. I screwed it on there, and then I clamped this piece, meaning I have the entire surface to carve. And then another thing I would like to show you on this piece is, how I attached the front and the back. It's just two screws, and they are with the grain.
Do you want to hold it up?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll hold it like.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll hold it like this. So the screws are, along the grain. Remember us talking earlier about how wood shrinks? So it will not shrink in this direction, and this is why the screws are here. If I would screw it like this, I might get a crack in the middle after a while. So this piece, I had to put a lot of thought into how I'm going to use the wood in this piece. If I would have had the grain run this way or this way, I would have had a few tips that run across the grain, which they would just be too weak and pop off. So what I decided on a glue up. So each segment is one piece of wood glued together in a round. There's one piece that runs straight through. So if you remember the wood movement, it shrinks and expands. So with having this one piece, it can't shrink and expand. So I need a disconnect here. So actually right here at the lip and the chin, it's cut through. It's completely severed. You don't see that, it's not obvious, but that's the way it is. And that allows the whole thing to shrink and expand. Also, because I have the background here, I needed to screw it so it still can do that. I wanted to include this piece, the black art of soil, because it actually has a crack in it. When I used the blowtorch on it, the wood shrank enough that it actually cracked. But I actually thought this looks cool on this piece. I did not want to change anything. I think this adds to the pieces. So cracks are not necessarily bad. in this piece, you see it's going in all kinds of directions, so I couldn't do this out of one piece of wood. So I actually have two pieces plus the legs, which are made out of plywood. So this is put in at the end as well. So this is one piece of wood, and this is one piece of wood. Obviously, this is the grain direction, and this is the grain direction. There's no other way I could have done that.